Unchecked power is a threat to democracy. This was the realization of the founding fathers of South Africa's constitutional order when they created Chapter 9 institutions to support and, very importantly, to protect our democracy from tyranny as well as from looting and other various of erosion. But their mandate is to ensure accountability of public officials. But how have they fared? Good evening. My name is Oliver Dixon and welcome to tonight's installment of Democracy 30. We asked the question, have Chapter 9 institutions successfully guarded South Africa's democracy and rule of law in the last 30 years? Joining me to reflect on this question this evening is Advocate Ndabiseng Sipenya Mukhale, who's the chairperson of the Commission for Gender Equality, but is also here representing all Chapter 9 institutions under the Forum for Institutional Support and Democracy. We also have Mama Shawbate Noko from the Foundation for Human Rights. First, take a look at this insert put together by Slondiwe Mtalane.
South Africa's journey to democracy was marked by triumph and challenge. In its constitution's preamble, the country pledged to heal the divisions of the past and establish a society based on democratic values, social justice, and fundamental human rights. It also pledged to lay the foundations for an open society that ensures equal protection by the law, united in its diversity. To achieve these goals, the architects of the Constitution established Chapter 9 institutions to strengthen South Africa's democratic foundation and entrench accountability.
We, the people, are also forced to appreciate now more than ever before the collective wisdom of the drafters of our Constitution in ensuring that, and I quote, there is separation of powers between the legislature, the executive and the judiciary, with appropriate checks and balances to ensure accountability, responsiveness, and openness. Additionally, one of the crucial elements of our constitutional vision is to make a decisive break from the unchecked abuse of state power and resources that was virtually institutionalized during the apartheid era.
The 6 institutions, which are supposed to operate independently without fear, favor, or prejudice, include the Public Protector, the South African Human Rights Commission, the Commission for the Promotion and Protection of the Rights of Cultural, Religious and Linguistic Communities, the Commission for Gender Equality, the Auditor General, and the Independent Electoral Commission. While the Auditor General and the IEC have been praised over the years for fulfilling their mandates, despite resource constraints across all Chapter 9s, the others have often been viewed as toothless watchdogs as the country increasingly grapples with rampant corruption, lack of accountability, human rights abuse, gender-based violence, and the lack of social cohesion. The 2007 parliamentary review of the institutions recommended, among others, that they be merged into a single human rights body to effectively implement the Bill of Rights and address the uneven spread of resources. Many years later, this has not happened. But the victims of apartheid and their families who are yet to receive redress, the landless people who are yet to see restitution, the violated women and children across the length and breadth of the country, and other vulnerable groups in society remain waiting for a just and equal society. Slondiwe Mtalane for Democracy 30, SABC News.
And perhaps the most important question to ask is, how vulnerable is our democracy to democratic erosion, and in the absence of Chapter 9 institutions, where would that leave us? Perhaps to start the conversation here, Ms. Noko, as South Africa's constitutional order tells us that we're a country that values human rights, and the very first thing our Constitution, Bill of Rights, espouses for is the universal access to human rights, and the erosion of institutions. It's effectively an erosion to the excess thereof. Have we successfully, in our democratic order, safeguarded against it?
Look, it depends, right? We have, in as far as the legislation that we've put in place, in as far as ensuring that the Constitution delivers what it has intended to. But in terms of implementation, that's a mix, right? Because how a person on the street experiences the universal access, then that will say that it's not always enjoyed. And a lot of people would tell you that, yes, we have a great constitution, but so what? If I don't have access to my human rights, I don't have access to housing, health is not accessible, or it is accessible, but the condition isn't, it's dilapidated, then I don't really have my human rights. But we actually do know that the Constitution does allow that. So it really depends. And in terms of the institution, to the degree that they have the mandate that they were given, it's a mix. I think we have a mix. There are the Chapter 9 institutions where there's a clear mandate, and there they are, in a sense, effective, but where it's not always clear, as in where the CGE, I'm sorry, advocate,
no problem at
and
all.
the Human Rights Commission, where there's sort of a confusion of the mandate, and it's not always clear who does what at what level, then there the effectiveness is a mix.
Yeah. Advocate Sipanya Mogale, let me ask this. And do we know what they're supposed to do, Chapter 9 institutions, and do we use them for the things they're supposed to be doing?
Yes, we do. Chapter 9s were set up by the drafters of the Constitution to actually ensure that the rights, as captured in the Bill of Rights and beyond, are actually realized. But they went beyond and said, beyond the realization, they've got to be promoted. You must remember we're coming into a new dispensation that was coming out of a violent dispensation, that was coming out of apartheid, that was coming out of an era of not accounting and not being transparent. So it was that shift to say, let's now try and be transparent. These are the rights. But how then do we ensure that these rights are actually realized and don't just sit there and become words on paper? That's where Chapter 9 institutions are coming from, to promote, develop further, enhance and sustain those rights that are in the Bill of Rights. But then it went further to say, based on the priorities of transformation, there are certain institutions that have got to be amplified. That is why the Gender Commission stands on its own, because you must remember, in the scheme of things, women, particularly African women, black women, but particularly African, were at the bottom of the rung. And you needed a specialized institution that will focus on not only making sure that their rights are restored, but there's restoration and equity and that entire process to bring them up to speed to their counterparts who make up the rest of the South African society.
Does the Commission for Gender Equality have sufficient constitutional powers to be able to bring that equality about that you speak of? And perhaps not just the Commission for Gender Equality, every other Chapter 9, you speak on behalf of all of them collectively.
Yes.
And there must be something said about the binding powers that the Auditor General doesn't have versus the binding powers that the Public Protector has. Is that sort of remedial powers vested in all Chapter 9 institutions, and is there a culture of adherence to it?
The question of the binding powers, or rather the powers that Chapter 9s have, came as a result of the Nkandla judgment, where the Public Protector then took it to court because there was a school of thought that was saying the decisions and the recommendations that he had put forward are not binding. And the judgment is clear. It does not talk about the Public Protector, it talks about Chapter 9.
Yeah.
Yes. So our decisions, our recommendations are binding.
Yeah. Do you find that there's a general culture of adherence to it?
Yes and no. There are people who do understand, and there are others who don't. And then there's that added burden on our side to keep following up on such institutions, which in itself takes time, takes resources, and takes away our attention from the next phase of what we ought to be doing because we are busy following up on the same person.
Yeah. Ms. Noko, are Chapter 9 institutions supposed to bring about a adherence to the rule of law in the country by and large, and are they able and empowered to do so?
Look, I think as Advocate says, there's a limit to what they're empowered to do. But for me, the challenge is when they make recommendations, I don't believe it should be up to the government or any other person to decide whether they adhere to the recommendations or not. And this is where we have a challenge. We have to decide as a nation, right? What do we do with our Chapter 9 institutions? It doesn't make sense that we have all these instruments that we have put in place to say we want them to safeguard democracy, and yet we are not utilizing them or giving them ample power to do what they're meant to do. And when I mean power, I mean if, for instance, you know, a Chapter 9 institution decides that this is the recommendation that we put in place regarding this matter, the government, if it's about a government or a human being, they should be able to adhere to those recommendations. They shouldn't be, I will decide how I feel about it. And I think this is the challenge.
Advocate, is there collaborative cross-pollination between Chapter 9 institutions in the execution of their duties? I ask this because the Auditor General can investigate malfeasance at a municipality and merely only say to us, hey, there's been malfeasance. But oftentimes, just based on the numbers, they'll be able to tell us there's been malfeasance. But the public protector has the ability to go and ask the questions, how did the malfeasance come about and who is to be held responsible for it? But oftentimes, the public protector does very few investigations out of own initiatives. People have to go and report it. Why do we not just cross-pollinate these reports and make sure that all institutions are involved in it? Even the South African Human Rights Commission. If there's malfeasance based on the books and water's not being delivered or clean drinkable water is not available, surely the South African Human Rights Commission has something to do?
There actually is cooperation between Chapter 9 institutions. In fact, the forum itself is as a result of Chapter 9 institutions coming together and saying, we would like to cooperate more. We want to cooperate. How do we cross-reference and how do we ensure that there's cross-pollination in terms of investigations, hearings, and all of that? This has actually resulted in a lot of positive things. For example, the public protector not so long ago actually had a report on some of the facilities that are supposed to take care or rather provide services to victims of gender-based violence. And part of that report that he produced was as a result of information that was requested from the Gender Commission.
Oh, wow.
So we do exchange that. The Human Rights Commission is actually now going around in prisons, visiting prisons to see facilities. We have just completed part of that. So it's actually building up on what we have done, although we focused on certain sections and they are building on that. So we do that. And like I say, the forum itself is a product of that collaboration.
South Africa was born out of an incredibly painful history where social cohesion is an important element on bringing society together, and that's part of the mandate of some of these institutions. We'll look at how well they fared against that metric on the other side of this break. Welcome back to Democracy 30. I'm still in conversation with Advocate Ndabiseng Sipanya Mukhale, who is the chairperson of the Commission for Gender Equality, but is here representing all Chapter 9 institutions under the Forum of Institutions Supporting Democracy. We also have in conversation with us this evening Mama Shaubat Enoko from the Foundation for Human Rights. Before we go back to the conversation, I just want to perhaps bring your attention to this. Social cohesion is a fundamental underpinning of our democratic project, right? And it's because we were born out of such a fractious and difficult history that the institutions supporting democracy are all geared to, in some fashion or the other, to bring about social cohesion. But how have we fared in South Africa in bringing that about? Let's take a look at this graphic representing, I think to a very large extent, the ability of South African society, different parts of our society to come together. And this is a sentiment report on South Africa's social cohesion, where a report from 2013 about representing the percentage of people out of different ethnic demographics not wanting to associate with other races. We still have a very long way to go in South Africa when it comes to bringing about social cohesion. Well, you can see that in 2020, 1 in 3 white people in South Africa still said that they don't want to have anything to do with any other race. Similarly, a third just about a third of black South Africans have a very similar sentiment. The lowest of it are Indian South Africans. That's 1 in every 5 Indian South Africans, 1 in every 4 Indian South Africans who have no desire to form any attempt of association with other races. There's been various instances, Ms. Noko, in South Africa's democratic history that has been incredibly painful, that reminds us, once again, the work that we have to do. I want to take you back to a recent report that just came out of the South African Human Rights Commission about the 2021 July unrest, right? Very specifically, where there was very clear ethnic violence between Indian South Africans and black South Africans in KwaZulu-Natal. One can go back to various other moments in our democracy, the Senegal protests being another one of these things. Our institutions collectively have to investigate one or other way what's going on as far as South Africa's social cohesion is concerned. Do they pay enough attention to the subtext of social cohesion in South Africa?
Yeah. Look, I think this is the broad challenge, right? In my view, first of all, I don't think Chapter 9 institutions should be looking at individual cases, right? I think they should be looking at systems that govern our democracy, you know, to monitor them and ensure that certain things don't happen. Because the general environment in South Africa is toxic, then you have such, you know, statistics that you've read, right? And then it's going to be very difficult to say that at the level of a Chapter 9 institution, they are going to monitor, you know, the country and see what's happening, because it's a small institution in terms of capacity, right? And it has this huge mandate. So my sense is, if government, you know, the institutions were set up differently to how they are now, then we would be able to read such things. It's not too difficult to believe the statistics, right? And I think government has to decide how it looks at such statistics.
Yeah. Advocate Sipanya Mokhale, the intersectionality of some of these instances are also important. Women bear the brunt of violence in South Africa, no matter where and how that violence is taking place. Is enough attention being focused on that? So, for instance, when a case goes to the Equality Court and it's about racism, it's only ever about racism, never the intersectionality of racism and sexism and the violence that emanates that disproportionately affect women.
Yes, you are correct. I think more needs to be done to actually look at the status of our society in terms of race and other dynamics in a holistic manner, rather than in silos as we're doing. That's the first thing. But secondly, we also need to see ourselves, all of us, your C9s, government, private sector, individuals in our communities, civil society, as citizens who also have a role to play. In South Africa, I think one of the challenges that we have is we always push something aside. It deals with 1, 2, 3, 4, therefore it cannot be mine. Whereas we're supposed to be seeing ourselves as, if I am a citizen, what activism can I bring to this so that we achieve those values that we have in the Constitution? Everybody just feels, if it's not affecting me, you know, I will not be involved. Or if it affects me, then it's affecting me as a person, rather than seeing it for what it is, as it has been pointed out, a systemic challenge, a systemic problem that we have, because most of them are systemic problems. Phoenix was a systemic problem. It was not one community against another. It was the Indian community against the African community, innocent African community, angry Indian community at the wrong people, you know, so it's that.
Would you like to have more powers, more than just remedial powers, perhaps powers to sanction to affect your constitutional mandate more effectively?
Yeah, we do to some extent, but currently we're in the process of actually amending the CGE Act of 1998. We believe it has actually outlived its usefulness in so many other ways. When you look at the levels of violence against women, when you look at all the, what can I say, legislative instruments that have been put in place that continue to be ignored. You know, your employment equity, your basic conditions of employment. There's so many things that we actually feel it was during the honeymoon phase everybody meant well. Everybody thought everyone else also means well, whereas we need a different approach.
Ms. Noko, let's talk about money. A lot of these institutions do less because they receive less resource support. Is it time we legislate a minimum standard of resourcing for Chapter 9 institutions, perhaps all democracy-building institutions that are statutory in nature?
I think it's time, and even further, I would go to the extent to say that we need to find a way of appointing those that serve in these Chapter 9 institutions, because for as long as money is dictated by the very government that is supposed to be monitored, then we're going to have challenges, right? Because our democracy is still fragile, right? We are not going to, the government isn't always happy to give sufficient money to Chapter 9 institutions if the very Chapter 9 institution is going to come back and say, hey, dude, you are not doing as you are supposed to be doing, right?
Yeah.
So we need to rethink that conversation. We need to think about how we make those appointments, who makes the final decision, not just who nominates. It's not enough that you're saying to us, civil society can nominate a person to go and sit. You must say who makes the final decision.
Yeah, a lot of parliamentarians watch this, Advocate Sipanya Mokhale.
Yes.
You can look into the camera. There's a camera on you right now. What is your message to parliamentarians watching this now, thinking about this very question about the empowerment of Chapter 9 institutions, specifically around resourcing, appointing, and about expanding legislative powers?
I would say Chapter 9s form the foundation of the democracy that we actually are supposed to promote and protect. And unless and until we fund them and source them appropriately, we stand to undermine the values that are espoused in our Constitution.
Do they duplicate? Do Chapter 9 institutions duplicate some of Parliament's mandates and things they're supposed to be doing? And where they do duplicate, do they do them better oftentimes?
Well, I think the duplication, we must see it in two ways, right? So within the Chapter 9 institutions, there are institutions like the IEC. It has a clear mandate, the Public Protector and all that. But in relation to perhaps the South African Human Rights Commission, the CGE, where the other one broadly is human rights, but the other one is specifically to gender equality, where do those rights, where's the limit? Who does what until when, right? And then in terms of government, they should be complementary, right? Because as you can say that the Chapter 9 institutions can investigate, but then when it comes time to implement, surely the judiciary should come and play part.
Yeah, I promise you this is a safe space. Advocate, you can be very honest here. Do you enjoy appearing before the Portfolio Committee on Women, Children and People with Disabilities when you report back to them, but also to go and support them? Do you find those engagements to be useful at all? They're mandated, but do you find them to be useful?
They could be better. That's the first thing. But secondly, I think we should not only limit ourselves to appearing there, but to actually see it as an institution of accountability. Whether we like it or not, the people who sit on those committees are actually appointed by the people to represent them. That's the first thing. And then they turn around. They are given the mandate to set up government and to set up institutions. They turn around and set up government and set up institutions. And then they have all the right on behalf of all the people of South Africa to come back to those government departments, to those institutions and say, what have you done? So if by any chance they are not presenting it properly, when they ask, what have you done? How far have you gone? That's a different a debate altogether. But the right to be where they are and ask for accountability is in the Constitution. They have all the right to do that. They've been given the mandate by the people of South Africa and are therefore the people of South Africa through that committee.
Yeah, that's where we're going to have to leave it. Thank you so much for your time this evening. Really, really do appreciate it. These are my guests, Mama Shawate Noko from the Foundation for Human Rights, as well as Advocate Ntabiseng Sipanya Mokhale. I'd like to hear your thoughts on this. Tweet us. It is at SABC News, hashtag Democracy30. You can tweet me. It is at Oliver _ speaking on Twitter. We're back with you next week, 8 p.m. sharp, with another installment of Democracy 30. But for now, good night.